Well, fundamentally, Europeans had to somehow make okay their oppression. They had to make okay their aggression. They had to make okay their theft, their rape. And the way that they did that was to fold it into a level of normalcy in an educational arena, which suggested that these people, meaning African American people, were deserving of such treatment. That somehow African American people or people of African descent, Africans, were lacking what Europeans had as it related to intelligence, morality, physical capacity, spirituality, even having a soul. All these things were questioned by people, that various individuals within the educational system. When I think about, John Newton, who penned the Amazing Grace, and as we look at his behavior, again, this is an individual that said that black people were without souls and thus not destined for the next life, which then, in his mind, I imagine, justified his raping girls and women on slave ships. You see, so you look at that behavior, and then you look at statements by Carl von Linnaeus, a preeminent biologist, best known, said to be the father of anthropology, who is best known for the classification of species and genus and phylum, all of the things that we know as it relates to biological classification. He then put in the 1700s, into the pot his notion of race classification. And of course, fundamentally, this becomes part of our education because Carl von Linnaeus becomes someone that's unavoidable if you study high school biology, for example. And what he suggests is that we are by nature, by a fact of science, inferior. That we are lustful, cunning, lazy, governed by caprice. These are the things he said were inherent, scientifically proven qualities of people of African descent. So one has to ask, why would he say such a thing? Well, we're talking about 1777, we're talking about a period of time when American chattel slavery was existing in the country. And again, we have to ease the mind and the conscience, not only of white Americans, but of those looking on at America, so that they too can feel comfortable with this peculiar institution called slavery.
In the history of our struggle, we have come to face a paradox, the normalization of trauma. It's a term that might seem distant or clinical when applied to our experiences, but it is deeply personal and profoundly affecting. The weight of this normalization is not just in the abstract, it is embedded in our daily lives, in the subtle and overt ways we are conditioned to accept suffering as a permanent fixture of our existence. From the harrowing days of slavery to the present moment, our people have been subjected to relentless violence, systemic discrimination, and socioeconomic disenfranchisement. This oppression has not been a series of isolated incidents, but a continuous, evolving force that has seeped into the very fabric of our lives. Yet, despite its persistence, we have been expected to endure, adapt, and somehow find normalcy in the chaos. The normalization of trauma begins with the history that we are all too familiar with. For generations, the cruelty of slavery, the brutality of Jim Crow laws, and the pervasive violence of racial discrimination have not only shaped our past, but have also laid a foundation for how we experience and cope with trauma today. The stories of our ancestors are etched into our collective memory, not just as tales of suffering, but as markers of resilience and survival. However, this resilience has often been misconstrued as acceptance, turning our ability to endure into an expectation. This phenomenon is not confined to historical context, but extends into modern realities. Today, the impacts of institutional racism manifest in unequal education, disproportionate incarceration rates, and systemic poverty. These issues are not merely statistical anomalies. They are the everyday realities that shape our existence. We are expected to navigate these treacherous waters with an unwavering strength, often without acknowledgement or adequate support. In our communities, the normalization of trauma takes on a more personal form. We witness the impact of these systemic issues in the form of mental health struggles, economic hardship, and social alienation. The pressures of navigating a world that is often hostile can lead to a resigned acceptance of these conditions. We learn to adapt, to put on a brave face, to push through the pain. Yet, this adaptation can come at a cost, with our trauma becoming a background noise that we learn to live with, even as it continues to affect us profoundly. This normalization is also reflected in the cultural narratives that surround us. Our stories of hardship are often reduced to stereotypes or commodified for consumption, stripping them of their complexity and the call for genuine change. We are portrayed as resilient or defiant, but rarely as individuals deserving of genuine empathy and systemic change. Our suffering becomes a narrative that others can consume, while we continue to bear the brunt of it. The normalization of trauma is not a natural or inevitable state, but a result of systemic failure. It is a reflection of how deeply ingrained inequalities and injustices have become. It is a testament to how our suffering has been trivialized or ignored, forcing us to adapt to a world that seems indifferent to our pain. To break this cycle, we must recognize that normalizing trauma is a form of oppression. It is a denial of our humanity and a dismissal of our experiences. Acknowledging this is the first step towards change. We need to demand more than mere survival. We need to insist on justice, on real systemic reform, and on a recognition of our suffering as a call to action rather than an accepted norm. Our trauma is not something we should be resigned to. It is a powerful indicator of the need for profound change. We must challenge the systems that perpetuate this normalization and advocate for the resources, support, and recognition that our communities deserve. This requires not only confronting external injustices, but also addressing the internalized acceptance of our suffering. In the end, to normalize our trauma is to accept a world that is unjust and unchanging. But we have the power to redefine this narrative. We can and must insist on a future where our trauma is not an accepted part of our identity, but a catalyst for transformation. Our history and our current struggles should serve as a reminder of the strength we possess and the change we are capable of. It is time to reject the normalization of trauma and to fight for a world where our experiences are met with empathy, action, and justice.